This conference will now be recorded.
Hello everyone, this is a brief overview of the Chai protocol training that is offered by VLSI Guru Institute. This training will cover the issue G of the Chai protocol. So let's briefly talk about what is the agenda for this training. Initially, we'll be starting off with understanding the Chai protocol overview. While I mean, it focuses on understanding why there is a requirement for Chai. While when we already have the ACE protocol, so it starts off with understanding the need for Chai protocol. I mean, what is the kind of complexity Chai protocol can uh, address. Other than that, then we'll go into the basics of cache, the cache coherency, and the basic memory organization, uh, all those aspects. Then we'll talk about some cache coherency keywords. Then we'll talk about 7 line states that are required for cache lines in the Chai protocol. Then we'll also, while we discuss about this, we'll also talk about the MOESI diagram, state diagram that is used in Chai protocol. Then we'll also talk about the Chai based system architecture. I mean, what are the different components that are present in the Chai? It could be the requester node, subordinate node, or the home node. So we'll talk about all those things and what are the different types of topologies that are used in a Chai based architecture. We'll touch upon all those things. And then we'll talk about the Chai network topologies. That is what mesh topology, ring topology. There are various topologies. We'll touch upon all those things with the relevant examples. Then we'll talk about different layers in the Chai topology. It could be the network layer, link layer. So we'll touch upon all those layers and what are the different types of packets that are used at each of these layers. Then we'll initially start with the basics of link layer. There are, see, the Chai protocol is implemented as different channels. So we'll be discussing about what are the signals channels mapping for different nodes. Let's say it could be requester node, or it could be the slave node, subordinate node. So what are the different channels that are present at each of these nodes? We'll talk about. Then we'll also talk about the channels. I mean, different channels. There are around 6 channels, so and we'll talk about what are the signals that constitutes this channel. Then we'll talk about the, now since we are talking about request channel, response channel, snoop channel, data channel. So majorly there are 4 channels. So we'll talk about I mean, see, in all these requests, there are different types of requests that could be initiated. Let's say read. So there are various types of reads we can do, various types of writes we can do, various types of snoop request can be initiated. So for each of them, there is a corresponding opcode. So we'll be talking about all those opcodes and the mappings. Then we'll be going over each of the channels and the corresponding fields. Then we'll also, like when we talk about all these channels, the communication happens in terms of flit. So we'll talk about what exactly is flit. And we'll talk about the protocol that is followed for interface activation and deactivation. How does that handshaking happen between two connected ports? And then we'll talk about the protocol layer. So there we will get into the different types of transactions that are generated on the channels. How the read transaction happens, how the write transaction happens, all those things we'll touch upon. So there we'll touch upon Chai transactions. Then we'll be going into the individual transaction categories, the read transaction. So there we'll touch upon all the categories of the read transactions. Then we'll talk about different types of transfers, the write transactions. Then we'll talk about the data transfer. I mean, when you do write transactions, so what, when the data transfer is involved, so how is it handled? I mean, in how many beats does it happen? All those things we'll touch upon. Then we'll also touch upon the third transaction category, that is dataless transactions. Then we'll talk about cache maintenance operations or non-CMO transaction stash requests. Then we'll also talk about combined write requests. Then we'll talk about transaction identifier fields. As you are aware, Chai is a complex architecture, so with multiple requester nodes connected. So when they initiate, so there will be a requirement for transaction identifier to track different phases of those transactions. Then we'll talk about the next category of transaction, that is atomic transactions. Finally, we'll talk about some miscellaneous transactions. Okay. Then we'll be talking about a scenario where if the transaction doesn't go through, so what is the mechanism for retry of the transaction? That whole entire sequence we'll touch upon. So then we'll talk about the Snoop transactions, and we'll again go little deep into the link layer. So initially we have just touched upon the top level overview of link layer. Now we go deep into the link layer. Then we'll talk about channel interface signals, and then we'll talk about increasing the interport bandwidth. I mean, how does the what is the provision given by the chai protocol to increase the port bandwidth? I mean, generally, what do you do? Increase either number of ports. Here, there is a provision where number of channels could be increased. So that also we will touch upon. Then we'll talk about transaction attributes, the ordering concepts, the different response types, and we'll talk about the forwarding Snoop transactions, where the data directly gets forwarded from one requester node to other requester node, though it goes through the home node, but it's a concept where data gets directly forwarded from one requester node to the initial or original requesting node. Okay. Then we'll talk about exclusive accesses. Then how the errors are handled in chai protocol. Finally, we'll be talking about the concept of memory tagging. We'll also touch upon the SLC replacement hint. Finally, memory page attribute. Okay. Uh, then we'll talk about page-based hardware attributes. So all these things is what is will be covered as part of the chai protocol. Each of these will be covered with the relevant examples. So what is shown in the numbers is the corresponding slide numbers. Okay. So this done around 780 slides or so. It is kept elaborate so that each and every topic is done in depth. This is a brief about what is planned as part of the chai protocol training.